I think ArenaNet want to try and push the players a little bit and make things a little bit more challenging, right? You know, they want to make things harder and want to make the player base better at the game. So if they nerf it, they're saying, yeah, you don't have to get better, we'll just nerf it, which is probably not what they want to do. I think it was just one of those things that maybe they just didn't tune it quite right. Like, they could have maybe tuned it a little bit easier, and it still would have been okay. But I don't know. I think it's actually... The problem is man, like, if you... I have to kind of get, like, the paint.net out here, right? So... let me get my online paint.net, guys. Online paint. Like, this is the issue that you're experiencing. Like, this is the real problem with Dragon's End, guys. So, like, this is, here we go. We have, like, a graph of things, okay? Like, we're doing it again, guys. Look, little YouTube clip here. Here's the issue, right? So we have, let's see. We have, difficulty D, capital D, diff up here, right? And then you have... oh, you know, we have content here. We have content, right? So the problem is that 99% of content in the game is like here, right? It's around here. And Dragon's End is definitely a bit of a step up, right? Dragon's End is going to be like, boop, right? It's going to take you to around here, right? Like this is, we'll just label it, okay? Boop, 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 D-E. So to do Dragon's End, you need to understand boons, subgroups, stacking, vaguely pressing your buttons, right? You got to do the pre-event. You got to do all the meta event stuff. You got to understand how the event works. So it's a bit of a step up. Now, the problem is that because everything else in the game is totally free, this seems, for a lot of players, this seems outright impossible, right? Because everything else in the game is unfailable, right? But in a way, even if you don't have Dragon's End, you still have problems. Because now let's move on a little bit. And now we've got, let's say here we have, I would say that in terms of actual mechanical intensity, like player skill requirement is significantly higher in, let's say, strikes. Right? Strikes are a little bit higher. They're not too bad, but they're a bit higher. Then you have raids over here, right? So we've got raids, and you guys can fill in the gaps, right? You guys can fill in the gaps elsewhere. So, you know, things get a little bit more intense on strike missions here as well. So, you know, now we go up to here, right? And then raids are a little bit higher again. Although some of the raids are very easy, to be fair, but, you know, on average. The problem is that let's just imagine the blue line is the world where DE doesn't exist, or nothing like this exists in the open world. The problem is that you then have to do this, right, if there's no DE, right? And then if there's no strikes, then you have this when you get into raids. And it's even worse too, because you also have stuff like, honestly, PvP with no kind of open world mechanical engagement is brutal. Seriously, it's arguably more brutal than strikes. I'm just gonna put we'll put another one in here. Let's go ahead and say that this here is like PvP, right? Here's PvP. I think World vs. World's a bit more chill. I'd say World vs. World is actually... I'd say World vs. World is maybe... is a little more intense than Dragon's End, actually. Let's say that, like, open world zerging, like, World vs. World is about here, right? Approximately. It's a little more mechanically demanding than doing something like Dragon's End. Again, requires similar concepts. It requires boon understanding, stacking understanding, event understanding, right? Following a commander understanding, right? Like, just very basic concepts to do World versus World. But the thing is that one of the reasons why this is so painful and why people really, really struggle with kind of getting into these game modes is because of this. This is a problem. I'm not saying that everything should be really hard. I'm not, actually. I think that things are okay. It's okay to have really easy content in the game. Story content can be pretty easy. Most open world content can be pretty easy. I'm totally fine with that. But I do think that you do end up with this very big problem that players do everything completely for free, right? Then when they try anything that isn't totally free, they get brutalized, right? You get annihilated. When you go into PvP as a new player, you're like, what the fuck? dude, I thought I knew what I was doing in this game. Because, dude, I was winning all these open world events. I was farming the story. And then you get annihilated in 2 seconds, okay, by all these, like, random abilities. They're just going berserk, right? Like, annihilating you. You go in world versus world, and all of a sudden you have to dodge out of an AoE, and you get, like 50 necro wells on you. You're like, whoa! What the fuck is going on here, right? You try and do a strike mission, and there are actual mechanics that you have to do, otherwise you're going to hard fail. Now, I don't disagree that Dragon's End is probably a little too far. I don't think the other meta events are anywhere close to Dragon's End, and this event is a bit of an issue, for sure. But I don't think... I think that Dragon's End should be reworked, but I do think that this flat line needs to be addressed, okay? This is bad. I think it reduces the enjoyment of the game for a lot of players. It really, really does. Because when they try to get into other game modes, they get just beaten, like smashed into the ground by the game asking something of them. Because the game has never demanded any kind of mechanical interaction before, but now it does, right? For Dragon's End, for strike missions, for raids, for World vs. World, for PvP. And that, to be honest, is a big part of why I think some of these game modes actually struggle, because it goes from 0 to 100. Now, funnily enough, here's a bonus meme. Here's a bit of a bonus meme. I actually think that there are design issues here with the game and with the events. So, Principle 1, Hard Enrage. Hard Enrage is actually probably bad. I think that one of the key issues with Su 1 is that if you run out of time, you instantly lose. This, I think, is actually bad. I think there should be a soft enrage on Su 1, such that, let's suppose you're in a group that's pretty borderline, you should be able to survive another 2 to 3 minutes with things slowly getting worse and intensifying, so you can, like, finish it off, right? You can finish the job as much as you can. And I think hard fail states also are very, very punishing for new players. So I think these should be avoided a little bit, a lot of the time. It's one of the reasons why I think that they didn't add enrages at all to strikes, by the way, is because the enrage timers are what make the mechanics relevant. If there was no enrage timer on Su 1, no one would be complaining about it whatsoever, because the mechanics don't mean anything unless there's a timer, because you can just fail them over and over again until you get there. That's one of the really key things to look at there. But also, this is actually kind of the game. Wait, I just wrote 1 twice. The game. Okay, so Guild Wars 2 is a very weird video game. It actually is very hard. I don't actually disagree with people when they say that going from open world to Dragon's End is a big step up. But the other thing is that notice that Dragon's End just requires you to understand the very, very basics of the game. I'm talking the absolute fundamentals. Positioning, subgroups, right? Boons, right? Working as a team. This is not some kind of super duper omega hyper mechanic. This is the absolute minimum understanding of how this is. And this is a problem with Guild Wars 2. I fully admit this, guys. Actually, and I've actually talked about this before. I've made an entire video about difficulty in video games, and particularly MMOs. The difficulty here is because there's a lot of things that are involved in understanding how to play Guild Wars 2, right? There's a lot of things. And the basics include quite a lot. The game is complicated. Guild Wars 2 is an extremely complicated game compared to other MMORPGs, right? And this means that wherever you put this step, so wherever you put this, guys, it's always going to be tough. So wherever you have this initial red arrow where it goes from totally free to it gets a little bit harder, this here is actually quite difficult to fix. It's hard to get around this because no matter what you do, guys, there will always be a fairly harsh jump, right? Where it goes from totally free to, okay, you need to understand some of these mechanics now. And wherever ArenaNet puts this, it will definitely be a big friction point for the game. Because, so in short, to kind of sum that up, I think it's very difficult for ArenaNet to ever add anything that would be easy enough, but also hard enough to make people learn at the same time. ArenaNet is in this very weird position where they are almost forced to make something that's going to be pretty brutal for most players. Otherwise, people will never be able to make the jump, right? Because we've already seen that players have a really tough time getting into strikes or getting into raids. Because again, like, you have to learn the basics. So for raids and strikes, right, you have to learn the basics and then you need mechanical skill. To get into World vs. World, you need the basics, then you need mechanical skill. For PvP, you need the basics, then you need mechanical skill, right? Whereas with this, it's just base mech, right? This is just the basic game mechanics. Then after this, it's like personal skill. After this, it's more personal skill. Then more personal skill again, right? And they've tried to isolate just the kind of basic mechanics for Dragon's End, but even that's too much, right? Even that's too much of a step up. So what do you even do there? Like, how do ArenaNet actually attempt to do this? Like, what can they actually do? I mean, you could have, the only thing you can do is have like a hard fail, like with a break bar or something. But would that make it any better? How do you think people would feel if an event literally hard failed without a break bar, right? Probably not a very good idea. And this actually really goes back to the game. The game is complicated, and basic mechanics is a lot of things. And it's really hard to separate them because they're all intrinsically linked, right? So basic mechanics like boons, squads, subgroups, stacking, right? Damage output. These things are all completely integrated into each other, right? They're all one giant blob of a thing. And separating them is almost impossible. So this is a fundamental issue with Guild Wars 2. I mean, maybe the devs will be able to get around this, but I actually think they won't. I think it's really hard to solve this problem because it's hard to separate out all of these basic mechanics and have you kind of like engage in them one at a time. I think it doesn't help that it's like a 50-player piece of content. So like, well, it's not really true that everyone needs to understand. Realistically, in an event like this, there are going to be 20 to 25 people who know what they're doing and then 20 to 25 leeches, right? That's just the way of anything that's huge player content, just like in Classic WoW. Like in Classic WoW raiding with 40 players, you've got half the raid that knows what the hell's going on and 20 people who are there kind of along for the ride. So it's not necessarily as bad as it sounds. Like one player can't screw you on Dragon's End, to be honest. That's just not the way it's going to be. But it's very difficult. Yeah, there's an NFT for you guys, okay? There is an NFT. Boom. I love to see it. I mean, yeah, you can have like a hard check, but you're going to have the same kind of problem. It's very difficult to ramp up to basic mechanics. I think the game doesn't do a particularly good job of expressing those basic mechanics to you, but again, that kind of takes me back to the game being, in a way, a little bit fundamentally flawed. The game is very complicated, right? It's much more complicated than your traditional Holy Trinity MMO, so it's very difficult to actually do that. But yeah, that's, in my opinion, that's the Dragon's End dilemma, guys. The Dragon's End conundrum is fully enabled, my friends. That is the conundrum. That is the dilemma ArenaNet faces.